since mankind discovered the ability to explore the vast seas, uncovering the mysteries of the world, many would return with these fables of their daring adventures, how they've encountered monsters and witches that lurk the seas. My friends, these stories, myths as many would call them, were the reflections of man's fascination for horror. The kind of stories that not only recognize a man's courage when facing the unknown and forever mark his name in history as an adventurer, explorer, giving humanity a broader view of the world we live on. And of course, we may have evolved from these ancient horrors and sea fables. However, it is said that the planet is made of 71% water, that even though we have the technology to stand on the moon, it is interesting how we know very little to nothing of the oceans. Today, my friends, we get to join a group of desperate fishermen exploring these oceans, trying to find that catch, seeing how their livelihoods are depending on it. But a couple days of no luck and the signs of a storm coming, our fishermen begin feeling the weight of their lives being affected. Their time in the sea ending with emptied nets, and realizing that there was nothing more they could do other than head back to port because of a violent storm. But when the fishermen would hear these strange sounds being carried by the storm, the sounds of a siren singing its song, our fishermen are about to experience a horror that have not only lurked these oceans for centuries, but share an unremitting horror that will have us think twice before deciding to explore the seas. Introduction: Koji, a young man who's been struggling with his first couple of days as a fisherman. Last night during the storm, his inexperience with the sea had not only brought him to a nauseating sickness. The violent motions of the ship being rocked side by side was too much for the boy, which is why he slept through last night's strange event. But with his sleep being interrupted by the sounds of his crewmates yelling "heave" again and again, just enough for Koji to get up and investigate, assuming that they reached port. Instead, Koji was confused to see that they were still in the ocean, and the crew near the side of the ship, using all their strength to pull in the fishing net, as they continued yelling "heave" in unison. Finally, this was it, the break that they needed. Based off the tug, this may possibly the biggest catch that the captain had ever seen. Immediately, the captain demanded Koji to help them pull in the net, and without question, Koji grabbed a handful of net and joined the crew as they tried pulling in their big catch. And as Koji watched the net slowly being pulled out of the water, that was when he saw it. An arm. Horrified when seeing that there was a body that got caught on the net. Its pale flesh, decayed and rotted away. Even the stench was unbearable. And yet the crew still continued on pulling in their big catch, oblivious to the fact that there was not just one body, but a dozen more that were being pulled from the sea and into the ship. Some of them were barely clothed. It's as if these waters were riddled with bodies. And watching the crew pull in the bodies and drop them on the deck, that was when Koji began realizing that there was something not right with the crew. Just now realizing that he was the only one who was shocked by this discovery when seeing his fellow crewmates cheer and celebrate over their greatest catch. For some reason, they thought that they caught tuna. But when Koji confronted Mr. Takata about his strange behavior, telling his captain that it wasn't tuna they brought into the ship, that was when Mr. Takata had taken a second look at what was dragged into the boat. That was when the expressions of joy and excitement turned into horror, when he and the crew finally saw the carcasses. Frozen with disbelief and disgust, confused as to how they mistaken these bodies for tuna. So shaken by this horrid event, not wanting to have his ship full of rotting bodies, that is why the captain felt that the best option would be to throw them back into the sea. The whole day, this crew of 5 are no longer fearing for their livelihoods. Now, they are very much afraid for their own lives. Since this morning, the captain had lost navigation. He doesn't know where they're at, or how to get back home, and calling for help is useless seeing how the radio isn't picking up anything. It's as if they are in the middle of nowhere. But what is truly haunting this crew were the bodies. Even though they all agreed to keep their morning catch amongst themselves, to tell no one what happened, it is a fact that all of them, with the exception of Koji, could have sworn it was tuna that they pulled into the ship. How on earth did they mistake carcasses with tuna? Some of the crew remembered waking up this morning, finding the sea red, like the color of blood. Something is happening, and it is scaring these 5 men. According to Mr. Tagada, he was strongly convinced that the bodies and the strange feelings were connected to the awful noise he heard during the storm last night. The siren's call, and if he's not mistaken, it happened around this time. And the moment when Mr. Tagada mentioned those words, that was when the siren's call would interrupt the eerie silence of this haunted sea. Such an unbearable noise piercing into the minds of these men, forcing them into clenching their ears tightly. According to the captain, he's heard of these stories before. No, this wasn't a siren's call. This was ancient. A sailor's tale of monsters that try confusing its victims and pull them into the sea. This sound was the cries of a demon. Even though these men tried muffling their hearing, it was useless. Almost an hour of hearing that demon's cry, and our crew trying their hardest to be free from the mysterious horrors of the sea. It wasn't until the captain began hearing something else outside the cabin. In the water were the sounds of splashing. This was it. The fish were coming, and it was now time for these men to do their jobs and man the nets. And when Koji noticed Mr. Tagada joining his fellow crewmates, with this blank, empty expression on his face, once again he would watch the crew at the side of the ship, trying to heave in the fishing net. And when Koji looked into the net, he would be stricken with absolute horror when seeing the water in the color of red, as if it were blood. And the net full of bodies, decomposing bodies that were twitching and moving and being pulled into the ship. And as the crew pulled in the mound of bodies onto the deck, once again celebrating their biggest catch, all the fresh tuna, it was when the bodies began to stand up on their feet and move toward the crew. That was when these men would be brought out of their spell and face the reality of their situation. Koji had no choice but to watch these monstrosities force his fellow crewmates to the edge of the ship and push them into the water, watching the captain, Mr. Tagada, and the others scream as they disappear into the waters below, being dragged down into the watery graves. Immediately, Koji ran into the cabin, locking the door, trying to keep away from these abominations. The boy was only fooling himself from the inevitable, teasing himself with the idea of returning home alive with a horror story that will have men think twice before venturing the seas. But with the bodies finding their way onto the ship, piling up against the cabin, it was only a matter of time before Koji would find himself joining his crew. It is said that dead men tell no tales. Well, somewhere in the sea is a fishing boat, and on the side of this boat is a crew of 5 men, dead, and their bodies resting on the fishing net, hanging off the side. Not sure how long it will be before this boat is found, but when it's found, you will be surprised how the imagination will craft itself with a horror story when trying to understand how these men died. Of course, there will be those who would see this as nothing more but a bizarre fishing accident. But knowing how we humans have a fixation with the supernatural and the unknown, this discovery could be quite a horror story to share, where only the brave or foolish would enter the seas, venturing into the unknown.